if we sort of zoom back out into the sector, so I guess a couple of things. One, charity digital skills reports. You've got a really great macro view of like what is going on in kind of the sector in terms of skills, capabilities, capacity, I imagine is a hot topic. And then just the work with your clients. I would really love to kind of hear like what are the big themes, what are the things that are on people's minds, and what is the report kind of screaming to the sector that it really needs to start thinking about?
So there are three things that I'm going to focus in on, and I do want to say that we've got tons of other data in the report. So this has been a tricky choice. But the three things that I always remember about the report are, firstly, despite all the challenges, there are a lot of challenges reflected in the report around access to funding, needing clarity from leadership, and I'll talk a bit more about leadership in a moment. But certainly, despite all those financial constraints that are really making it challenging for some charities to progress as far with digital as they would like, 63% of charities have made progress with digital this year. And that is really hard won, given all the things we know about cost of living crisis, restructures, governance as well, as we were saying earlier. So that is very much my silver lining. Also, another very positive bright spot, we know that 76% of charities are using AI, up significantly from 61% last year. And that for me is a really exciting story about innovation and progress, and charities who are trying different things at a time when it's actually should be almost impossible to do new things. But in some ways, this is a good time to be really looking at what you can do. It's almost like you've got nothing to lose. Why not try doing things differently? The thing that does keep me awake at night is that progress built on foundations that are strong, that are firm? And we know, particularly in the context of AI, that 36% of charities say that their CEO has poor AI skills, and 44% say the same of their boards, speaking of governance.
Yeah.
So that, for me, is a leadership crisis. It's a leadership skills crisis. And your point earlier about governance and it being out of sync with that day-to-day momentum around digital and change and innovation in charities. And then we see this further lens on that, which is leadership teams and boards potentially not being in quite the same place as the rest of the charity is in terms of what the future looks like and how they can make informed decisions about strategy. That for me is a real worry, because you've got some really positive things happening around change, but not the foundations on which you could make that change truly sustainable. So that for me feels like a very urgent thing to be looked at across the sector.
Yeah, and I think, and we definitely want to dig into where do you start to build those foundations before we get into that. And I feel particularly lucky with my trustee experience at Blood Cancer UK. So I spend a lot of time with the digital team, the fundraising team, and they are experimenting with AI. We did Manifesto, ran a sort of learning session a couple of weeks ago around like marketing technology, AI, and everyone was so engaged. And our whole board conversations, what people are bringing is I guess their lived experience. So I can talk at it from my experience of incorporating it into operations that we're doing, but also then the work with clients. Then we've got like research community where AI and the kind of mass data sort of analysis is like really quite interesting. And so I genuinely feel sometimes I'm quite lucky with my sort of Blood Cancer UK connection, because it is part of the conversation. Absolutely, it's been driven by the leadership team, and the sort of the CEO and the board are super engaged. But I guess when you've been going into trustee boards, right, and you've been having those kind of conversations, like how are they landing, and are you being invited in? Are you like trying to get in there to be like, you need to know about this?
Well, I'm not smashing through the window if you want any boardroom like
Break for
James
AI
Bond.
emergency.
Ta-da, I'm here. Well, I think you have to find a way in that doesn't feel too scary for people.
Yeah.
You make it accessible. So what I always do is try and frame it as a business problem
Yeah.
rather than a tech problem, because as we all know, there's lots of leaders out there who are really nervous about technology, right? Because I think the way technology gets talked about in the wider press and online is that, oh, you need to be a tech expert and you need to be founding a startup, and you don't actually need to do any of those things in order to be good at technology. You just need to be curious and you need to be ambitious and willing to learn. So that is always my way in. It's really about, well, let's not talk about technology per se, but let's look at how things are changing in the market you operate in. So if you're a mental health charity, let's look at what other mental health charities are doing about AI and digital, and let's see how the world around you is changing and shifting, and what could you do about this. So really it's about helping them take some ownership of the change, showing them that the change doesn't need to be scary. It's not about you need to be technical experts, you need to be able to code. It's about helping them to really understand you can't really go on as you are, otherwise that's really a recipe for going backwards. And let's look at some different routes that you could take and what might feel like it's the best fit with your mission. What capabilities would you need in order to make those changes? So you can have that conversation step by step and relate it back to previous changes that the organisation has made. That said, I do think the level of change we're seeing with AI it's like change on steroids. And this time in a year, goodness only knows where it's all going to be.
Exactly. And I think we're definitely in the space of like being really clear on the use cases, and that can be internal operations, but it also could be, you know, actually your service users are already engaging with AI when they're searching for health information, when they're trying to find access. So it's not to be ignored. And one of the things that we're sort of, I guess, maybe we're fighting the tide is this desire to have this fixed roadmap. Okay, so in 12 months time, 18 months time, 3 years, and it's like, right now there's a horizon. There is no point in trying to plot these fixed things that are going to happen, because the whole point is the uncertainty, the ambiguity, but just knowing like you have to build that agility within the organization to actually embrace the changes and think about creatively ways that maybe AI could support them. So I do think there's something with, you know, for us to reflect on as a sector around our sort of need for certainty, and to have buttoned down this like 1, 2, 3, 5-year roadmap for AI that really is redundant in 3-6 months time, maybe 48 hours, depends what, you know, is happening.
I think that's exactly right. And I don't think that's getting talked about nearly enough. And I'm so pleased you've raised it, because I think agility is a muscle, right? Being able to innovate is a muscle as well. It's a skill set in itself. And charities need that time and that space in order to look at what is evolving around them, what new technologies are coming to market, how they might respond. You know, obviously the big one this year has been about agentic AI. That said, I do think the speed at which we adopt this stuff in the sector, we do need to do it in a really considered way. We need to make sure we're doing the right user research, that we're co-designing with marginalised communities. Otherwise, everyone's just going to go hell for leather on solutionising. And that for me is not ethical or responsible AI adoption. It's about just taking a product to market, and the communities in which we operate are very complex, very sensitive. And that's why we need to take it step by step and work hand in hand with them every step of the way.
Yeah. For me, you know, when you say like this is like change on steroids, like absolutely. And then sort of my greater reflection around leadership roles is that so many of them are just too big, you know, like because as the world changes, so does the role kind of expand exponentially, and the cognitive load that leaders have to carry is enormous. And what strikes me is that AI requires leaders, boards, particularly very senior leaders, to go to quite a vulnerable place and say, actually, I don't know how any of this works. And when I think about, I don't think that there are sort of comparable times in living memory where the learning curve has been so steep. So how do organizations create a culture of kind of curiosity or vulnerability around learning, particularly when I think about the challenges of the multi-generational workforce? You know, in 10 years, we'll have people in the workforce who are probably kind of AI sort of AI natives, versus people who, may have started their career having never touched a screen or a keyboard. Any thoughts on sort of how organisations sort of look at this in terms of their wider strategy?
So the number one thing that I've seen make the biggest difference, and in fact, I was with an organisation who were doing this brilliantly yesterday, was if you can encourage your leaders to just give stuff a go, to just lean into their natural curiosity. So for an organisation that's just starting out, it might be, well, kick some ideas around about your new strategy with AI. Use it as a thinking partner. Exactly as you were saying earlier, the average charity leader is so overloaded. My friends in the private sector are always just astounded that there aren't teams of people to delegate to. Or what do you mean that CEO doesn't have an entire strategy team under them? Well, the average charity doesn't. So encouraging leaders to just explore how they can think with these tools, talk to these tools, work through challenges and opportunities with them, I think that can be really helpful. And then to talk about what they're doing as well. So again, this amazing CEO I was with yesterday from quite a small NGO, he was talking about how he was trying new things with AI and what he'd learned, what he'd not learned. And that was really giving his team permission to then say, actually, we're going to try these things. And then you want to get all of that learning out in the open. You need a really safe culture. You need a culture that doesn't attribute blame. Because actually, in a weird kind of way, that is the safest way to do it. You don't want people experimenting with AI in dark corners, even if they're trying to do the right thing, because that's where the risks can occur. So having these spaces in the organisation where people can learn together, it might be in the weekly meeting, it might be that you've got an AI working group where people can bring their use cases, they can share their learnings, so they're not endlessly reinventing the wheel. And that for me is where the growth and the scaling and the change starts to happen.